I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. You know, it wasn't that long ago that Dr. Mark Skidmore, a professor of economics at Michigan State University, an expert in public finance and budgets, made an astounding discovery after listening to Catherine Austin Fitts, who was saying that the Army itself admitted to not knowing where $6.5 trillion was in their budget. And of course, Mark Skidmore heard listening to that and said, oh, that can't be right. They can't be missing $6.5 trillion. That's an unbelievable amount. So he got a team of people together at Michigan State University, PhD level and master's students and PhD candidates in economics. And he did a forensic deep dive using Office of Inspector General reports. And this happened from 1998 to 2015. And lo and behold, with the Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and DOD, Department of Defense, he found 21 trillion undocumented expenses, missing money. 21 trillion. After 2015, after they took all this information off, they put it back on, but they quit giving it in 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So here we are with Dr. Mark Skidmore from Michigan State University with an update. Dr. Mark Skidmore, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg. It's good to be back on.
Listen,
glad to talk about this.
Well, listen, this 21 missing trillion is the biggest figure in accounting history. I mean, here we are, when you came on, we had about 20 trillion in overt recognized debt, and you come on with this 21 trillion additional debt. And we were talking about $41 trillion a day. Donald Trump puts his hand on the Bible, which we're never paying this back. We'll talk about that in the thing. And now, you know, they removed this Office of Inspector General reports for a while. They put it back on up to 2015. And then they quit producing this information where you could do some deep dive and figure out kind of what's going on 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Did they stop just creating fake money and adding covertly to the deficit in the background? Or are we just are we at the pinnacle here that we just have 21 missing trillion? Is it much bigger than that?
Well, let's talk about it. I have an update that I'd like to share, and I'd like to get feedback from your audience as well about some of the information I'm going to share. We also know that as part of this, FASAB, or the Standard 56, was implemented, allowing high-level officials to modify financial statements that are viewed for the public. So since about 2018-19, late 2018, we really can't even know for sure that the financial statements are accurate, because they said we are going to modify them, and there's not much in the way of guidelines or limitations on how much can be modified. So that's also something that we've talked about in the past, but I just want to highlight that as well.
And they also said that this FASB, the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, not FASB, not FASB, but FASAB, they said it was a national security issue.
Yes.
You can't find out what's going on. So now we are at, the budgets are dark, and you're still trying to figure out, you know, are they continuing to do this? What happened with the 21 trillion? So pick it up from there. Are they continuing to do this? And what happened to the 21 trillion?
Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a FOIA request, information that I obtained from the Army about the 6.5 trillion 2015 unsupported adjustments. I'll talk about that, and then I want to talk about from the sources side, if this is really expending beyond what is acknowledged, then the money had to have come from somewhere. And so I've dug into some of the Treasury reports, and so I want to talk about that as well. So let's quickly go through the uses side. I submitted a FOIA request back in July of 2018 or 19, and this past, it took about 7 months, so early this year, I obtained some information regarding 170 adjustments, unsupported adjustments. These are unverified transactions that tallied to 2.1 trillion. So for context, Canada's GDP isn't even that much. So it's a huge amount of transactions that are unaccounted for, and it's just 170. So I thought that would be a good strategy submit a FOIA request and try to get information. And I did get that information, and the data and the summary are available at missingmoney.solari.com. Just look for the missing money update in May of 2020. So missingmoney.solari.com. What I did is I just organized the 170 adjustments and started pulling that apart. And I think this is pretty interesting, but really the information that was provided, it enables you to ask a few more questions, but it's not enough there to really determine exactly what's going on. For example, there was a $163 billion adjustment, and it indicates that the customer was unable to provide some type of information. So for context, the Army's budget, the general fund budget in that year was $122 billion. So this explanation accounts for $163 billion that the customer was somehow unable to provide some information. So if it's a small amount, that does happen, and sometimes you just can't verify, and so it's recorded as an unsupported adjustment. But when it's $163 billion, you have to ask yourself, what? You know, was there some follow-up on that? Apparently not. I don't know.
Well, wait. So
there's an $86 billion.
So they had $163 billion,
yeah,
their entire budget for the Army, and it was like, oh well, yeah, we lost it. We have no idea. Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
That's as best I can tell.
Okay.
There were $86 billion in errors and reasonable checks. That was one adjustment. An $88 billion adjustment to clear abnormal balances. Many of these can be considered, plugs. Sometimes that's what people refer to these adjustments as plugs. But when they're in the over $100 billion, you have to ask what's going on, right? And there doesn't appear to be any follow-up. So this report summarizes that and enables you to kind of see some specific examples of adjustments that are enormous.
Just so you.
So that's the uses of the update.
So that's the 2.1 trillion. Just so people get an idea, you've said this before, but I want you to say it again and explain. Let's say you have a $100 billion budget, state budget or a budget of what? Let's say it's I think New York's 100 billion. Let's say what percentage would you expect that you wouldn't keep good track of? What's the percentage of that you'd say, okay, this is kind of under the wire. You shouldn't do this, but it's okay. What are you looking at for a tip off of over this amount? It's total fraud.
Oh, just a few percentage points. So if it's 100 billion, you wouldn't expect more than just a few percentage points. Less than 3 or something like that would be a lot. That's $3 billion that you couldn't account for, right? And so if you work for a private company, I have a friend who works for a major company as an accountant, a lead, and if there was an expenditure that wasn't accounted for that was over, say, about $25, they would go track it down and find out what happened. Why wasn't this justified? So when you have, in this case, a budget of $122 billion and your unsupported journal voucher adjustments are $6.5 trillion, that's 54 times the budget, and you have to ask, what is going on?
But that's
how can that be?
And
it's
then
not a situation.
I'm sorry. And then on top of that, the whole ball of wax that you got with unsupported adjustments, missing money, theft, robbery, who knows? That's an unbelievable money. That was when you discovered this. This was bigger than the overt admitted to deficit. We had 20 trillion when you admitted this, and you tacked on another 21 trillion. This is unbelievable.
And so, I've always viewed my role as being somebody who helps increase transparency and asks useful questions. And so that's what I did. I presented this information. I tried to ask useful questions, and I wasn't able to get anywhere with the OIG in terms of more detailed information except through this FOIA request. And so I have a message out to somebody from the Army that I hope I can get a little more information. And so that's how my strategy is to just plug away at this and try to compile information and then share it. And so I appreciate being on with you to share it with others who care about this, which I think is very important. So that's the uses side regarding the 21 trillion in unsupported journal voucher adjustments, and we're just looking at 10% of that total, right? 2.1 trillion and 170 adjustments, which is astounding in and of itself.
And it stinks to high heaven.
What I'd like.
I mean, right? I mean, the accounting stinks to high heaven.
It doesn't.
This is fraudulent. It's the missing money is more than the Army's just the Army, not the Pentagon, just the Army. The missing money is more than the Army's budget. That's an unbelievable fact.
Yes, by a lot. It's astounding, and we should care about it.
And we can't even find the 21.
So the second part.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Second part.
Yeah. So we've been focusing on the uses side with these unsupported adjustments and tallying them up and trying to help people see the scope of it. And so we've been doing that. The other part of the report focuses on the potential sources. If all of these unsupported journal voucher adjustments truly represent spending above what was authorized, then that money had to have come from somewhere. And when you do interviews like this, sometimes people contact you and they provide ideas and tips. And in this case, there's a lawyer here in Michigan, his name is Tom Stannis, approached me and said, hey, have you ever looked at the Treasury website? They have daily, monthly, and annual transactions on debt issuance and reissuance. And so for context, our total debt at the end of 2019 was about 22 trillion, and just over that. But the issuance and redemptions was over 90 trillion. And so let me explain to your audience what this means, or why you might have more issuance and redemptions than total debt. So total debt's 22 trillion. Some of it is short-term debt and some of it is longer-term debt. If it's a 30-year bond, then the churn isn't that much. So Greg, if you bought a 30-year bond, after the end of 30 years, you might turn in your bond and you would get your money back plus interest. But every year, our government borrows more money because it spends more than the revenues brought in. So by definition, it has to reissue a bond to replace the money that it just paid you. So that's called churn or turnover or reissuance. But a 30-year bond doesn't have a lot of churn. On average, 3.3% would come due in any given year. But there's a lot of short-term debt. The shortest term note is a 4-week note. And so at the end, the government might borrow some money on a 4-week note, and after the end of 4 weeks, it would pay that money back with some small amount of interest, and then would have to reissue. So a short-term debt would have a lot of churn over the course of a year. It would have to turn over 13 times. So the amount of reissuance depends on the debt composition based on the term length. And
Correct.
So in 2019, at the end of 2019, there was 90 trillion.
Wow.
Okay, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so how much did they really need to churn? So in other words, they're churning to support $90 trillion, not 21 trillion in missing money. We're talking about 90 trillion.
Yeah. So let me explain what we did. Okay.
Wait, stop.
What we did is we asked.
Hold on, stop. I want to back up. This isn't a big number. I mean, our entire budget is something like $3 or $4 trillion, and we're floating $90 trillion. Am I right about that?
Yes. Yes.
That is frightening.
If all of our debt was short term, let's say all of it was in 4-week notes, you'd need nearly 300 trillion in churn over the course of a year to support that debt. But if it's all 30-year bonds, then you would only need less than $1 trillion of churn over the course of a year, in addition to the new issuance on the new debt. Okay, so what I did is I took all of the data from the Treasury and categorized the existing debt in each debt category. So you have bills, 4, 8, 13, 26, and 52-week bills. You have 2, 3, 5, 7, and 10-year notes. And you have 30-year bonds and some other debt instruments. So we categorized all of that data and found out how much debt was in each one, and then calculated the churn rate. And what we found was that the 22 trillion would only need about 16 trillion of churn and turnover to support that debt. And so the question is if you're going to need 16 trillion to support the existing 22 trillion plus the new debt issuance, which would have been about $1 trillion, this year it's going to be about 4 trillion. Why do we need 90 trillion? And what's kind of interesting is that over time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'll finish your thought. I'm sorry. I'm so excited. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm so excited about this because this is profound. But go ahead. Why would you need 90 trillion to support 22 trillion? Just pick it up there.
Well, the only two reasons that I can think of are, one is that over time we moved more towards short-term debt. And there was about a 5-year period where we stopped issuing 30-year bonds. I thank Rob Kirby for that fact. But the average term length is actually not shortened over that period. So it's not that we're moving all towards shorter term debt that would need more turnover. So that's not it. The only other explanation I can come up with is that the federal government, the Treasury, is supporting more debt with the reissuance than is officially recognized. And what I'm doing is I'm floating this around. I'm asking people, have a look at this. Is there some other possible explanation? And I don't know of one.
I mean, we're talking not a little bit.
The other thing that's...
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Well, let me just get in there.
Huge sums of money.
This isn't a little bit. This isn't like, well, we're supporting an extra $1 trillion, which is enough. I mean, that's 1,000 billion, right? An extra trillion. We're talking that we're talking 22 trillion, but they're floating 90 trillion. That's a staggering amount, is it not?
Yeah, that churn that happens because of the different debt levels needing more turnover. If there is more debt out there, and that debt structure is similar to what we know exists with the 22 trillion, that 90 trillion could support up to 120 trillion in actual debt. I don't know that that's a fact, right? But it's sort of it's a discrepancy. Why do we have 22 trillion in acknowledged debt, but 90 trillion in reissuance? But according to my calculations, and I'm pretty sure that's right, we wouldn't need 90 trillion. We don't only need 16 trillion. So it looks like maybe there's another explanation, and I keep asking people, is there some other explanation? I haven't gotten one yet. The other interesting thing that I want to point out is that over time the debt level has increased kind of steadily, right? About, at least in recent years, about $1 trillion a year. But the reissuance has expanded at a faster pace. And in 2015 and 16, the debt reissuance increased by over 35 trillion in a single year. So that's another question. Why did we need to issue 35 trillion more than the year before, between 15 and 16? I don't know the answer to that question either. It's a huge sum. Why the sudden big jump? And again, that graph is available in the report, and you can see it for yourself.
Is this you're a family man? You got a wife and some kids. Are you afraid that this is gonna just blow up?
Well, I mean, we're all watching extraordinary things happen. We have this COVID event and extraordinary policy response. Typically in the past, when we had a major issue on health, we would protect the people who are most vulnerable and we would isolate those who are ill. In this case, we've isolated everyone and we've shut down the economy. So we're having severe, impacts from that, including an expansion of debt in the multiple trillions, 4 trillion anticipated this year. All of the new debt that's been issued has been purchased by the Federal Reserve, as you know, Greg. So I'm watching all of this unfold along with everyone else, and we all know it's unsustainable. But as I've walked through this experience with the 21 trillion, I've had to ask myself, well, what does it all mean? What is true and what is not? And like you, Greg, in the last financial crisis, I stopped drinking the Kool-Aid, and I realized that it's very difficult to get the facts you need from the traditional sources, and you have to work very hard to get information that's accurate. And so, again, my role is doing a small part to get a little more transparency and ask the questions. And yes, it is concerning to me because this could blow up, right? We don't know when or how, but if people lose confidence in our government, they lose confidence in the currency, that can have severe impacts on lots of people and really the whole global economy, above and beyond what we're experiencing now.
Is there massive fraud involved? You said before, come on, the Army's budget's 100, the Army, not the Pentagon's budget's 160 trillion, 120 trillion, and they can't find 160 trillion. Or do we have, with this now, we have 21 trillion that you did on OIG. Of course, they don't have those reports anymore, 16, 17, 18, 19. And now we're supporting 90 trillion in churn. So it's not 21 trillion. It could possibly be 90 trillion undocumented, unsupported expenses. Is that what you're telling me?
It's possible that we have a lot more debt than we realize. It's possible that over the years we spent a lot more money than is acknowledged. The implications of that are very important. Is it fraud? I have tried so hard to get information and talk to people, and it's been quite an experience, and it makes you question the structure and the system. Is it fraud? For me, I have to be able to prove it. What I have are documents that suggest something is really, really wrong, and it's not just bad accounting, it's more than that. And so I just keep pushing away and trying to get to the bottom of things as best I can.
What could go wrong?
Well, Professor Stephen Roach, Yale University scholar, has just recently said, hey, the dollar could crash. We could lose the reserve currency. If that happens, things could become quite expensive for everyday Americans, right? And we could lose our that particular advantage that we have in the global system. And it's a huge responsibility. But if we lose it, it could have a big impact above and beyond the impacts we're experiencing now. So I think, you think about, well, who would be the next leader if the U.S. were to fade away, and it might be China, for example. And I certainly don't advocate that as the new sort of global, situation. So I would much prefer that we move in the direction of transparency and integrity and try to set our system right and move forward in a way that's better for people. Well, and right now that's not happening, I don't think.
We're going to have to, are we not going, can this debt be paid back? I mean, you're saying hard numbers, we're floating $90 trillion. Our annual budget's, let's say $4 trillion. No way we can pay this back. No way. Is there any way we can pay it back?
So just the amount of debt that we're accruing now, the way we could pay it back is through inflation, right? The value of things could go up. We had a severe bout of inflation in the 70s, and so then the debt load relative to nominal GDP goes down, and but we all lose out, but in an indirect way, right? So that would be the most likely outcome, as opposed to just flat out not paying, right? We would just pay with, you know, eroded value of dollars.
But this is the inflation would
And
be.
that's very costly.
Oh, yeah, but Dr. Skidmore, the inflation would be astronomical. And we're talking 90 trillion. We're talking our GDP is 20.
Well,
We're talking 5 times, 6 times, 5.5 times our entire GDP. The inflation would be
if
stupendous.
indeed this.
Go ahead.
Well, think about the 70s and early 80s. We had double-digit inflation, what, 10% or, you know, in that range for several years, and that accumulates. So you don't have to have you know, sort of hyperinflation for this to right itself. You could have high inflation for you know, for a decade, and this could right itself, even with the 90 trillion, I think. But again, I'm putting this out as shared intelligence. I don't have all the answers on this Treasury data. It's the only explanation I can come up with, is that we have more debt out there than we acknowledge. But maybe there's somebody who's smarter than me that can offer some additional insight about why that might be.
I appreciate you being careful, but we all know you're right. Okay, so we all know you're right. Thank you for being careful and being humble. The other thing is that if this is fraud, and I know you think it is, that why do we have to pay all this back? Why don't the fraudsters, the people that made these decisions, where did the money go? Why don't they pay it back? Why does America, the American taxpayer, the American citizen, have to pay all this back? I mean, this is fraud.
Yeah, that is a point that Catherine Austin Fitts often makes. It's like, well, if this money is being siphoned off, we can we can track it down, and we can ask for it back. Where is it? Where is it? Is it in the financial markets? Is it hiding in accounts somewhere? Has it been spent on assets? Is it, you know, has it been used for purposes that create value for some but not others? Then can we somehow obtain that and use it to the good of the country? I don't have the answer to that question, but I think it's a good one, right? Because that money just didn't disappear. It was used for some purpose, and if there are assets behind it, then perhaps we can obtain it. But that, again, is about power and control, and so who has the power, who has the control?
Do you think that's why this Black Lives don't matter? Because, you know, this 40% of babies are black, are aborted. There's a police captain in St. Louis trying to stop, you know, the looters and rioters from breaking into a pawn store. They shot him dead. His life didn't matter. All the black-on-black crime, 90% of the murders are black-on-black. Those lives obviously do not matter. So what matters is power and control, like you said. Do you think all this is going on right now to cover up the fact that America's been robbed?
I think that's a really good question. You know, the question about the riots, you know, is there something else going on? Is that being supported by some other, you know, entities in order to create a distraction? Sometimes it feels that way. I want to be careful because I'm a father of 2 African American children, and I know that on occasion they might be treated differently because of the color of their skin. I have a friend who grew up in Detroit who, as a teenager, was driving out to the suburbs to go to school and was treated poorly by a police officer. And he was always afraid of the police. And then in order to move past that, he actually became a police chaplain and does that now. I want to talk with him about his experiences. because he now has had seen both sides. He serves police officers now. He's, of course, black, but at one time was very afraid because he'd been mistreated so poorly. So there is tension, right? But does that mean that you can just tear apart your cities? And should we have reparations and and all the things that are going on? I would argue that this is very counterproductive, and it's not really meeting the objective or the goal of treating everybody fairly.
Just to insert here, Black Lives Matter has a donate button that goes to the Democrat Party. The co-founder was on saying they're Marxist trained. They're talking they don't want mommy and daddy in the house. They want trans and trans. They don't like the traditional family. They want daddy out of the house. So just to let you know that this is, listen, I think all lives matter and nobody should be brutalized because of the color of skin. But this is not what Black Lives Matter is about. I mean, they had one of the people talking about how if we don't get what we want, we're going to burn it down and start a new system. This is about control.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so we can all agree we shouldn't mistreat people based on the color of their skin. But so do you think this is about the cover up of the debt of the money we stole? The money that was stolen from America?
So I want to clarify that I understand there are different treatment of people at times, but that's no excuse for what's happening, I don't think. And what you just said with Black Lives Matter is a fact. So there's something more going on than just, there's more going on to that. Is it a distraction? It feels that way. I don't have the view and the perspective to know for sure all the layers of things that are going on. But, what I try to do is ask myself the question, where's the control? Where's the power? What's going on? And, from the last financial crisis, I learned my lesson that, oftentimes there's a distraction and then you have to take a step back and look at what's really going on. So is there some reset in play? Is there a bigger issue at stake that this is distracting? Is it pulling away from, with other goals in mind? Yes, I think so. I don't know how it all fits together, but I know there's something else going on that we should be paying attention to.
And just so people understand, not just go ahead, and not just what
the civil unrest.
And I want to hit this again. I mean, there is no accounting fact. This is the biggest accounting fact in the history of accounting. I mean, you did it with the 21 trillion, and now you're hitting it again with we're churning 90 trillion. I don't know of an accounting fact bigger than this, certainly in the history of the country, and I think in the history of the world. We are the reserve currency of the world. This is a stupendous, I mean, it is an eye-crossing, mind-blowing number.
It is. It's too big. We can't wrap our minds around trillions. It's too big of a number, right? And so we tend to just sort of push that off as, well, there must be some explanation. And I'm asking, well, what is the explanation? And I'm not coming up with an alternative other than that we spent far more money than we say we have, and that we've borrowed far more than we say we have. I don't know for sure, right? Because all I have are these pieces, bits and pieces of data. And I can show the data. I can say, well, what other explanation is there? What's a better explanation for 21 trillion in unsupported adjustments? We're incompetent, our systems don't work. That doesn't pass the smell test, right? And so we're faced with this reality, and then we have to decide what we're going to do with it.
Just so people know, I mean, Michigan State University wrote about your $21 trillion. You were applauded by the university. You're not a tinfoil hat in your basement, nutty guy. The university stood behind you with this. And I mean,
the Michigan State University
is
very supportive.
Yes, they've been very. And so, but here's what I wanted to ask too: have you been threatened? Do you worry about, drawing fire? Are there people driving by your house? Are you getting messages from people that are unsavory? Have you been threatened? Have you been threatened?
No, I have not been threatened.
Great.
No.
probably because you're way into but you certainly haven't been, I mean, you put out this number. I mean, you work in the accounting world. You are a PhD, an earned PhD in accounting and economics, and public budgets and, all that. A lot of people in accounting are people lighting up to go, wow, Mark Skidmore, you're the man. I didn't know this was going on. What can I do to help you? Have you seen that in the accounting world where other people at Yale or Harvard or Michigan University or Missouri or Kansas or California or Caltech or, Stanford, Fordham or anywhere else, anybody calling you saying, wow, that's an amazing discovery, man. What can I do to help you?
I have a few people who say, hey, you're making a good point here. There's something going on. Lawrence Kotlikoff is one of those people. I've written a couple of 3 articles in his Forbes column at Boston University. There are a few other people. For the most part, people don't really want to be involved in it, or they sort of look at it and say, that's interesting or unusual, but there must be some sort of explanation, and they dismiss it.
Wow.
So that's the kind of response. Early on, I approached an auditor who his job was to come into local governments and right the ship when their finances went sour. So he is the absolute expert on local or government finances. And I said, I'll pay you for your expert assessment of these reports. I just want to know what you think. You don't even have to tell anybody what you say. This report can be private to me if you want. And we talked about it for a little while, and he said, I'll get back with you. And despite my trying to get in touch with him, he just didn't respond. And that's often the case for me. It's a little quiet, it's a little lonely. But there are some real good people who have come and said, hey, there's something going on here. I just happen to be one person who is talking about it a little bit.
Well, and you're not talking about
Catherine Fitz.
Yeah, that's right.
She has been fighting this battle for many, many years, saying, hey, there's something wrong in HUD. She was on the inside.
Yeah.
They
brutalized
so
her. Tried to kill her.
There are heroes.
Yeah. Well, so are you.
So,
I mean, this is
her story is amazing.
I know, but this is an amazing accounting fact that you've come up with. Facts now, multiple, and the people that you're pinging are people at major universities, and they're PhD level people in accounting and or economics or public budgets, whatever. These are people. These are your peers. And what I'm getting from you is that you don't have a lot of people that really want to be involved in busting a tens of trillions of dollars that nobody knows, where the money was spent. Am I right?
Yeah, not a lot of people want to get directly involved. A lot of people have an interest but don't want to become directly involved.
And if you were going to say the worst thing that could happen as a result of this got fully revealed, with our allies and our trading partners and the rest of the world, that, wow, you mean you've really printed, 5 times the amount of money that you say you have? What are the implications? Well,
first, if I can figure it out, I think our key competitors in the global environment probably have figured it out too. So I'm not so sure that among the key decision makers that this isn't known. I don't know that, but I would guess. But there are clearly movements. So the reserve currency status of the dollar is a difficult challenge to overcome. You're kind of, even if you wanted to get away from it, you have to, sort of like being in prison. You have a strong U.S. military that backs the dollar. If you want to move in the way, you can be punished in ways that you may not be able to overcome. So even though there are countries that would like to get away from the dollar, you have to figure out what the alternative is, and you have to be able to survive the aftermath of moving in another direction, which could be very costly for your country and your people. So it's not clear to me that even with all of this information that the dollar will go away immediately. but it may add to it and say, you know, we've got to move away from this situation. It's not sustainable. It's not good for the global economy.
At the very least, we're going to get, in your mind, inflation, pretty stout inflation.
Yeah, we could end up with inflation. It could be that the global system would need some sort of reset. People are already talking about that. I believe last week Catherine talked a little bit about that.
Yep.
So would that mean a different type of currency, a digital currency, something that's not dollar based? Your guess is as good as mine.
Dr. Mark Skidmore, I got to tell you, bravo, my friend. I mean, that's a record. You know, you're one more big revelation like this, you'll have the hat trick. But the 21 trillion, the 90 trillion in turn, those are huge accounting numbers that are ignored by the mainstream media. And you're hardly a guy with a tinfoil hat on your head. I mean, you're a PhD expert in public budgets, economist. Unbelievable, really quite unbelievable, and a team of people that backed you up, along with Catherine Austin Fitz. You lifted plenty of her share on this story. But Dr. Mark Skidmore, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, thanks again for having me and enabling me to share this information with others. And as I said, shared intelligence is really valuable. So if there are others who are familiar with the Treasury market and have some thoughts or input, I'd be happy to hear it. So thanks again, and I really appreciate coming on.
Thanks again, Dr. Mark Skidmore, professor at Michigan State University. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks.